I'll introduce myself, and then Laura, you can introduce yourself. I'm Nazely Kurkjian, everyone. My pronouns are she, hers. I am the coordinator of disability and non-traditional student services. I'm also the SUNY System EIT accessibility officer at SUNY System Administration. I work in the Office of University Life, which is our student affairs office at System.
And I'm Laura Harris. I'm the Distance and Open Education Librarian. My pronouns are also she, hers, and I am at SUNY as we go, although not right now.
Me neither. I'm in my house. So today we're really excited to share a more in-depth view of the library accessibility plans, which are a subset of the larger accessibility plan on your campus. And I just dropped the slide link in the chat for your review at another time. And so next slide, Laura, please. Today, I'll be sharing a bit about who we're serving at SUNY, what students are enrolled at our colleges across the SUNY system, a little overview of the policy, just in case it's new to you, our process with respect to reviewing the campus plans, and then we'll go into some details about the library plan specifically, of course, for this audience today. And then Laura and I thought about what made those plans so successful, and hopefully it inspires you to bring some ideas back to your campus, and so that we can collectively learn and grow together. I think it's important to see this as a continuous program rather than a plan, a static plan, because as our demographics and technologies evolve over time, so too will our digital accessibility initiatives, and physical, of course, as well. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of students with disabilities across the country in colleges and universities, what that looks like on SUNY campuses, and a little bit about barriers to self-disclosure. It may not surprise you that 1 in 4 adults in the United States have some type of disability, according to the CDC. I myself have a disability. Others in this virtual Zoom room might have a disability. Your disability may not be visible. That is very reflective of the students that we currently serve. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, 19% of undergraduate students disclose a disability to their college or university. It's a slightly lower percentage for graduate students, and they tend to be, non-traditional older students, veteran students, and the like. SUNY specifically, like the private colleges, we serve the largest self-identified college students in New York State. I believe we serve the most. It's like a difference of a percentage point. And so as the largest public college system, we have, lots of different reasons for why this work is important, well beyond what the legal requirements are, of course. And we'll get into that shortly. And this is the breakdown on this slide of what that enrollment looks like across SUNY. And so, this is for academic year 2019, 2020, and it's a pie chart that shows some of the categories that the New York State Education Department requires our disability services offices on campus to report, from ADHD to basic chronic medical conditions, mental health, learning disabilities, and there's subcategories below that as well. The largest category on this chart here is learning disability, followed by mental health, followed by a very increasing ADHD and autism spectrum population. And 3 out of 4 of those are under the neurodevelopmental category. And so a lot of invisible disabilities that we're serving. And so it's super important to challenge your assumptions about who is walking through the library or coming through the library. And it's so important to also know that these are just the students we know about, right? Like, these are just the ones who may have the privilege, the advocacy skills, the information that they are in fact a person with a disability, because some people, particularly with mental health disabilities, for example, don't view themselves as disabled, or people with Crohn's disease might not view themselves as having a disability. And so how that impacts their equal opportunities to our living and learning environments. They may not have had accommodations in high school. Maybe they have experiencing a disability, that rises to the level of where they might need an accommodation once they get in college or they're diagnosed in college. And so that's why this work is so important, because you are probably seen by everyone. I would defend that everyone uses the libraries. Not everyone has this professor. Not everyone goes to the disability services, but you are the front lines of access to information. And so you are such an essential part of making the community an inclusive environment. I think that there's this common misconception that people think that digital accessibility specifically benefits a really small percentage of people with disabilities, such as those who are blind, have deaf, or there are deaf or have hearing impairments. But the reality is that so many people with invisible disabilities, such as those with neurodevelopmental disabilities, individuals with traumatic brain injuries, and those with psychiatric diagnoses also benefit from accessible web design. And last thing I'll say here, just to
Could I interject something real quick?
Of course, Laura.
I just wanted to add as well, those the things that we do to make things more accessible for people with, say, a hearing disability, and I'm just going to use that one as an example, can often help people who do not have a disability, or who do not self-identify as having a disability. For example, captioning might be useful for someone who has a roommate and the roommate is sleeping and they're working on watching something for their class, or say a non-traditional student who is trying to deal with a fussy baby and doesn't want the recording going so that it disturbs the child. So that's something that I think is really, really important with accessibility, is to keep in mind that it really does help not just the students with disabilities, but in the end, it does benefit everyone.
Absolutely. I use them all the time myself. So we got a question in the chat about the percentage of visually impaired, and I imagine it's in one of the smaller slivers that doesn't have a number assigned to it. But I can share that, we have students that are voluntarily disclosing information in like the student information survey, or I know that the University at Buffalo does a survey on assistive technology users, and far more students use assistive technology or disclose in that student information survey than are reporting to the disability services offices. So while it may appear small, it also varies per campus. Actually, Empire State College, for example, has a lot more students with visual impairments or sensory impairments than some of the other colleges, and that may be because I will make an educated guess here that it's easier to orient in an online campus than it is to physically access some of our very hilly campuses, right? So, you want to probably ask your disability services office specifically, what this chart looks like for your campus, because on some campuses, mental health is the number one disclosed disabilities, and on others, it's ADHD. But typically across the board, it's learning disability. If we could just advance the next slide, Laura, please. The reason that I'm bringing this up is that stigma significantly leads to barriers to access and disclosure. There's a lot of students in high school coming to college who, for whatever reason, don't want to disclose to the office. maybe they are trying to have a clean start, or they want to be seen as normal, or there's that power differential between faculty and students, and not wanting to be perceived as a burden for having to do some extra work to make a document accessible or caption a video, for example. Like there's some literature out there that says, 72% of post-secondary students who received accommodations in high school choose not to access accommodations in college. So that's why, proactive accessibility is absolutely important. And we're not even going to go into depth about the intersectionality of some of the identities that our students hold, who may have multiply marginalized identities, and they may be queer and disabled, and non-native English speakers whose countries don't recognize some of the disabilities that we have in the United States, or they're from communities of color or other kinds of communities that have more cultural barriers to getting this kind of documentation that colleges may require to uphold academic standards and stuff. So the bottom line, accessibility is super important, and the libraries are a huge ally in supporting all students who come in, whether they're disclosed or not. So in case you haven't seen the policy itself, we have a link here in the chat. Laura, if you could, or in the presentation, if you could drop it in the chat, that would be fantastic. This was developed over a very long time. We started this work back in 2017. Some of you may be aware that a majority of our campuses went through Office of Civil Rights complaint and had to address the public-facing websites and their lack of accessibility for persons with disabilities. And so, we had a SUNY-wide committee meet, and we looked at all these different, the legal basis, the technical standards. We consulted different campus systems. We looked at different campus system and different individual campus policies that were, role models in this space. And we came up with some of our own set of standards that was actually modeled after the Ohio State. If you could progress, Laura, I'll share the key requirements here. So the key requirements of the policy are that each campus and system administration will have an EIT accessibility officer. I hope you know your EIT officer and get to know them well. Each campus and system will create an accessibility plan. And those plans need to incorporate a set of 5 standards. If you could move to the next slide, Laura. That'd be great. So these are the standards. Web accessibility, which is primarily for programmers, developers. Digital content accessibility standards, which is for anyone, any content creator, faculty, staff, etc. Classroom accessibility standards, which is really tailored to technology in the classroom, such as assistive listening systems and some of the physical layout of the space as well, which is applicable to the libraries too. The library accessibility guidelines for you all, and the procurement accessibility conformance standards, which is also broad. Really, that standard is a series of tasks to incorporate accessibility in the procurement process, whether you're buying something on a P card or going through a formal bid. And so, all of these standards, they may overlap. Your standard in particular, especially, I believe, overlaps quite a bit with the rest. You buy stuff, you have, you might have space with, fancy technology to hold different kinds of events. You create content. You have LibGuides on the website, right? And so the library accessibility guidelines are unique and also intersect with many of the other standards. And all of these can be found on the SUNY website. It's suny.edu/accessibility, which I'm typing into the chat. So you can find the policy there, the final report from the committee, the resolution from the Board of Trustees, and the 5 standards. If you log into SUNY Blue, you can find the implementation guidance for each of these standards. And I want to shout out to the librarians who, I don't know if you're on this call, but those who were part of the library accessibility subcommittee who crafted the implementation guidance. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't pretend to know everything about libraries. And so people from your offices, your departments, like took a really substantial amount of time and wrote this guidance. So I really think you should look at it, because they went to great lengths to make sure that it was easy to understand and implement. So another layer of the plan is incorporating these core elements here, which you will see shortly as we detail what was in the accessibility plan specifically. So there is supposed to be a plan for each standard area, and each standard area is supposed to weave in these core elements from authority to ensure that there's authority and responsibility to carry out your local policies and procedures related to the standards, raising awareness across your departments, divisions, and so on, to communicate any new protocols or existing supports that you may have been offering, designing policies or web pages or tutorials, procuring accessible databases or other, library-specific technologies. I'm making it specific to you, but this was really applicable to every single set of standards. Monitoring compliance of your website, of your process, maybe doing an audit every year, and then training is also super important. And I did see some people in the chat were part of the accessibility cohort, library cohort, and so we had a lot of training, went through a lot of different really great resources, which we'll also share with you at the end.
Before we go into the review process, I was wondering if it might be helpful to show you guys an accessibility plan. Have you all seen one before? Because if not, I think it might help lend some context and to sort of see what Nazely has been talking about.
That's a great idea, Laura.
Well, let's see. All right, we got a yes, please in chat. So I'm going to stop sharing the presentation.
Thank you, Carrie, for stopping the crickets.
And what I'll do is I will show you guys the Oswego plan, since I don't exactly feel comfortable showing others. Okay. And I will share my screen again. All right, is this big enough? Would people like me to zoom in?
I think it's okay.
Okay, I'll zoom in once, just hopefully that's not too bad. So at the beginning, we talk about this is how it's incorporated into the strategic plan at Oswego. This is something we've talked a lot about on our campus, and I've been involved with accessibility initiatives since 2016 at the Oswego campus, so I know where this sort of first paragraph is coming from. And you guys have probably encountered this a lot too, where people say accessible and they think, oh, it's accessible online, but that, is sort of the multiple meanings of accessible. So we wanted to make sure that we defined what we meant by accessible here. So a lot of the plans have sort of that, some sort of narrative at the beginning, and they may include their goals like we did. And
it may not surprise you that Oswego's plan is one of the best. So thank you, Laura, for everything you and your colleagues are doing. This is fantastic.
No problem. And you can see the sorts of people who are involved. Rick Buck is basically in charge of all our web stuff. We have both our director and our associate director of CTS. Not sure if CTS is a universal term across SUNY, if everybody has CTS, but if you're not familiar with CTS, it's just our IT department. So we've had a wide variety of people involved. And here are those 5 areas that Nazely was talking about and the core elements. And then, let's see, just some numbering, like where are you in your, in terms of meeting that particular item. Let's see. All right, so this is the web accessibility. You can see it's got the plan elements over here and then specific actions in the columns. Who has oversight, what resources are available, what the outcome is, the progress, and the time frame. And most of the, I think not all of the plans, but the majority of plans are kind of formatted like this, where they have basically tables and indicate what they're doing. This is the second standard, the digital content accessibility, and it's the same 6 plan elements. Classroom accessibility. And we'll pause on the library accessibility so you can see a little bit. And I think a lot of the good plans indicate that there's a team involved, who the resources are. Let's see. Awareness raising, creating accessibility related web page, who's responsible for that. This is another common one, provide basic OCR scans of instructional and research materials for individuals who need accommodations, basically anything that we create that, for example, in our special collections, we have like interviews, so making sure those are transcribed. So whenever we have the ability to make something available in multiple formats, to do that, but then to work with vendors and so forth when it's stuff that we don't own or have the rights to. Procurement, if you missed the session that, I know Rebecca was in the session, did this, and I am totally blanking on the other people who were involved, but there was a session on Thursday that was specifically about like database review. So that's really related to procurement. But hopefully I think you guys have a general idea now of what a plan looks like. We have governance committees and so on. So I'm gonna stop sharing this. And
someone was asking if your plan is available on the website.
You know, I'm not sure. I don't recall seeing it on the on our accessibility webpage, but I can ask about putting it there.
Maggie, I would say that generally most plans are not publicly available on the website. It may be because their campus has determined that it could be a risk that they don't have something in place, you know, because there is progress noted and time frames for completion. So it's more of an internal document, but I do know that, as Amanda just shared, there's a number of them in SUNY Blue, and I will update them after this presentation because some of those were draft. But I think SUNY Brooms is online, and theirs is very comprehensive and excellent. So.
And we can get you the link to SUNY Blue at the end of the presentation. I know Claire and I had it in our presentation, so I can just dig that up from our slides and we can put it in chat later. So I will go back to our slides now.
No, I'm really glad you did that actually, because now people can actually kind of visualize what it looks like. Yeah, I mean the it ran the gamut of what was submitted. As Laura said, most were in the voluntary template that we provided with some kind of narrative. And so in our review process, we had a EIT accessibility. We can skip this because nope, yes, okay, we're good. So we had a review committee formed to evaluate the quality of the plans to ensure that the key requirements were met. Basically, we wanted to make sure that there was an EIT officer, that you completed the plans and incorporated the standards and the elements, and that it was like an authentic, we are working towards accessibility, not just copy and pasting the benchmarks outlined in the standards and saying, okay, we're doing this and we're giving it all to this one person. Or so we were very thoughtful about how we evaluated the quality of the plan itself, not necessarily the maturity in execution of the plan. That committee comprised of myself, a colleague from the Office of General Counsel, two administrators from academic affairs, one who does academic program review and one who does academic policy and helped me with this policy, and an information technology professional, and a campus EIT accessibility officer whose background is in disability services. So we had a really good group of people. We created a rubric using a Likert scale from very weak to very strong. And we focused on the strength of the quality of the standards, the actions in that column that Laura was showing, like, again, not copy and pasting, but like, we're actually going to do this with this person or this team with these resources, and this is the outcome. And like, just really showing, the care and creativity and uniqueness to your culture and resources. I will say that the library accessibility plans overall were very strong and strong. I think 28 of the plans, library plans specifically, were either strong or very strong. So that's really good. And compared to the other standard areas, the only other standard that was as strong, if not stronger, was web. And that doesn't come as a surprise to me because of the OCR complaints, and campuses had to really get up to speed. And that was also, I think, the most mature in implementation as well, again, because of the OCR complaints. So if you want to go to the next slide, Laura. These were the common themes across the plans, and like what Laura shared in her plan, they had a campus-wide committee, and in fact, they had a specific library accessibility team. Some campuses were using data to drive a lot of the plan development. Some were multi-year plans, some were pretty aggressive and wanted to do it in 1 year. And again, it varied so much. Some campuses were really further ahead in this space, and some were just getting started. So, that was something that we frequently saw. It was a multi-year plan, dividing the plan templates, some really unique divisions of like adding a student life section. I loved that so much. Buffalo State added a student life section, which I just was super into. Or dividing the digital content section into instructional digital content and communicative digital content. So that I thought was really interesting as well. So we can move forward, Laura, and you can take it from here with the library accessibility plans if you'd like.
All right, thank you. So the ones that were identified as very strong were the ones on this list. And of course, I'm buffing my nails that Oswego is on this list. I do want to give a shout out because our plan was very much based on Geneseo's. And the only reason Geneseo's is not on here is because they submitted earlier than the review process, but theirs is also very good. So as Nazely mentioned, many of the library plans were very strong. And I think she's pretty much said everything that's in my notes here. So let's jump into some of the best practices. And as I go through these, I'm going to give some examples that I think might help illustrate each of these. So under the authority and responsibility element, we have identifying roles and liaisons within the libraries. As Nazely said, it really shouldn't be the responsibility of just one or two people. It should be something that's more widely implemented. For example, at Corning Community College, accessibility is going to be included in the job description for the incoming director. And you may have seen that my director, Sarah Wiseman, was also part of the committee for creating the EIT plan. She and I collaborated on the library part. And she is also on the accessibility steering group for the campus. And it's not just at the leadership level. I think especially when you think about procurement, you have people looking at databases and so forth, and that's definitely something that, depending on the structure of the organizational structure of your library, that could be an acquisitions librarian, it could be electronic resources management team, but there are different aspects that are going to make sense with individual roles within the library. Having a team at Oswego, we're actually incorporating accessibility into a larger diversity, equity, and inclusion committee within the library. And as I was just saying, incorporating accessibility specific duties into job descriptions where it's relevant. For awareness raising, some examples that I thought were noteworthy. The Buff State has an assistive technology lab, and so they want to raise awareness about that, put that up. They have information about that on their website. Making sure that your library staff is aware of campus opportunities. That's something that I think our library staff at Oswego have taken advantage of. I know at least one of our CSEA staff has attended a lot of sessions that we offer on accessibility. And just to give you a little background about Oswego, before and after every spring semester, we have something called breakout sessions. It's basically professional development that is offered for faculty and staff by faculty and staff. So it's kind of a low-key thing. It's a nice sort of presentation opportunity. And we pretty much always offer accessibility sessions during those times. So making sure that our staff are aware of those. And a lot of the exemplars have an accessibility page on their website or plan to create one. And I think that obviously falls under design as well. For procurement, I thought Stony Brook had some good specific actions like performing accessibility testing during the trial of research databases. And just when you're reviewing those, to look over any library feedback comments and any support tickets that were about accessibility. And let's see. I did not have any specific notes about monitoring compliance. I think the key word here is routine. Accessibility isn't a one and done. And I think Nazely has said something to that effect already, as well. It's really something that needs to be routine and sustainable. For training, one of the things I really liked is Buff State has each semester they invite someone from their student accessibility services office to come talk to them about themes relating to disability. And I think that's a wonderful way to make a connection with another office on campus, but also it just shows that that's a priority for the library and they want to be up to date with it. And I know many libraries, including Oswego, had recommended using DQ University when we had access to it. And Buff State had some additional resources that I don't have the links to right now, but I know one of them, I think, was Project Enable, I believe it's called, and that's at Syracuse. And I think it's just projectenable.syr.edu.
I think it's on our additional
Resources.
resources slide. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're going to jump into talking about those campus climate indicators of success. And one of the things Nazely and I really wanted to sort of drive home is that accessibility is a shared responsibility. And especially, you know, when Nazely was going over all these, you know, the 5 different standards, all of them really do affect the library. So it's really important for us to be involved in that discussion. For example, at Oswego, we have computers and we don't decide what software goes on there. That's our CTS does that. And I know ESF has input on the furniture that is purchased for the library, but they don't have the final say. So it really behooves the library to make sure that this is something that is given importance on the campus level, because it really does trickle down. One of the things that we wanted to talk about in terms of the indicators of success is the mission, vision, and values. And I thought this was very interesting that some of the plans involved their chief diversity and inclusion officer. Ours did, and I saw a few other plans that did as well, but some didn't. And that is, I think, something I feel strongly about, partly because of the people I work with on my campus, that diversity should be, disability should be included under the diversity umbrella. And I think also looking at how your campus thinks about accessibility and why they think accessibility matters. Even some of the exemplars were kind of disappointing in how they talked about accessibility and disability. They talked about legal issues. That seems to be the most common. And really, I'm kind of at a point in my opinions about accessibility and what I know about accessibility, and I think that's kind of a boring answer, and it's so limiting. I think if you really, there's a lot of educational theory and just research in general that shows that when you are designing an accessible experience, you know, when you're designing it to be accessible from the first place, it's going to benefit more people. And designing accessible experiences leads to innovation. I think most of us who have iPhones have used Siri, which was originally developed for people with disabilities. And actually, even one of the first typewriters was developed by someone who was trying to create a device to help a blind friend. So I think that's something, if you can, at your library, look and see what the narrative is around accessibility, and if you can, work to change it. I know that's a big order, and a lot of these things are a big order, and it's not necessarily something you can do on your own, but what the library does affects the rest of the campus and vice versa. So I'm going to hand this back to Nazely, and she's going to talk about attitudes and governance. And from here on out, we're kind of just going to like pass it to one another when we have something to say. So.
Yeah, I actually wanted to interject and add on here that, you know, this policy has been personally and professionally interesting and frustrating at the same time. It's rooted in a legal and technical framework, but to Laura's point, the ableism that underlies all of this is profound. And so I used to do a lot of how to make Word documents accessible and how to do this and that, and now I'm and that's what we needed, right? Last year, I mean, between the time the policy was approved and the plans were to be submitted, COVID happened in the middle of all of that, and so we needed to just quickly shift and teach people how to use technology or make things accessible. I mean, we were all just, it was so overwhelming. But now I'm trying, and thanks to Laura and Oswego and her colleagues, we're really trying to, reframe disability and talk about ableism, which is, discrimination against people with disabilities, and how those barriers, whether they're technological or attitudinal or physical, impact how we think about people in general. And we want to make this policy about equity inclusion, and that it's human centered rather than, we gotta checkbox this thing. Yes, it requires some low lifts, some are heavier than others, but we weren't taught this in school. It's like unlearning a lot of other isms in our life and moving forward and becoming better humans and improving the human condition. So, I think that the attitudes are a big part of that, whether that's from the leadership or from, the faculty, and other professional staff on campus, even students. Like, we have a responsibility as an educational enterprise to talk about this, not just in a legal and medicalized and technical way, but in a people way. In terms of governance, with respect to this policy and the plans, identifying key stakeholders such as yourselves, those partners in procurement, those critical people in IT, because it is kind of an IT-centric policy in nature. And so what we saw in the plans were, campus-wide committees, working groups, advisory councils, and I think the most successful ones were ones that had those, really senior roles, like at Oswego, the CIO, the CDO. That's a game changer in how this is going to move forward, and how those people might have access to resources, or how they might support you in implementing whatever ideas you might have. And then, specific frameworks. UB had a really interesting approach, like a strategic, tactical, and operational framework. And then also it's important to include governance in terms of the shared governance bodies that we frequently engage with, whether that's the faculty senate, the professional senate, and getting the students to care about this as well, the student government associations. Really, there are not a lot of disability specific clubs across SUNY. So if you're interested in mentoring one or being an advisor for one, however that works on your campus, like, students are really desiring disability outside of the disability services office to feel a sense of belonging. So yes, this is about digital accessibility, but it really is broader. It's like, do I feel included here overall? Or can I not access the website, the library, the this, the that? So it really is all encompassing. Collaboration, I can't stress it enough. This is not it's a shared responsibility. One person can't do this. Everyone has a role to play, and every office buys things, creates things. And so to try to cultivate strong relationships, I'm sure you already do, just specify it to this particular space, and distribute responsibilities across multiple functional areas. In terms of investments, the best plans we saw really invested in personnel. They hired an EIT officer. Now, I know there's resource issues, but I'm just saying what I saw. They hired people, whether that was the EIT officer or designate a staff person to go into faculty courses and help redesign stuff, or they hired staff or they moved staff. They recognized people had skills and said, oh my gosh, how to, evaluate accessibility with a screen reader and this other technology. And you also understand, like, the specifics of different people with different disabilities and how they might navigate electronic environments. So why don't you come over here in IT and review what the campus wants to buy? And so like that's what we're seeing is like look for talent and move people if they want to be in that environment and invest in them, because trust me, this field is growing and some other campus will take them if you don't view them in a really powerful way. Also important to mention, building in accessibility costs for all programs, services, and activities. We've been largely, a lot of us have been largely remote. And while we're still going to go back in person, I just remember when we used to plan conferences, we're like, all right, we got to think about allergies. We got to ask people if they need an interpreter. We still have to do that. We had to do that. We have to do it in virtual environments. Put it on all your registration forms. Oh, you want to come to the library tea chat? Make sure you have a question, or just provide it automatically. The automated captions that are provided today, right? So build that into the forefront of your mind. And I don't know, Laura, do you want to touch on the innovation here? Because I know it's your campus doing a lot of this.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're doing, or a couple of things we're doing are really interesting. And part of it goes back to training, which I think is, again, an investment. We have a digital accessibility analyst who basically one of her main responsibilities is to go into and remediate content. And of course, when the pandemic hit, her workload went way up. And so remediation is only sustainable to a point. And if you can get people creating stuff as accessible from the beginning, you're a few steps ahead here. And in addition to those breakout sessions I was describing earlier, we also, a few years ago, I think this is our third year, but we have an accessibility faculty fellows program. And so the way that works is, I believe it's calendar year, so January to December, and the faculty member chooses a course to remediate and make accessible. And then I believe they also have to present or publish on a topic relating to accessibility. And basically then you have that person as a resource within their school or department. And that can be really helpful. I know one of the people who I think was in our first year of the fellowship program, he's a chemistry professor. And as you might imagine, chemistry, math, physics, some of those subject areas have math, and that involves, a whole different set of knowledge. And Nazely is laughing because she just did a presentation on this, I think last week.
Yeah, it stressed me out a lot.
Yeah, there's basically a math accessibility language called Math ML, or it's not an accessibility language, but it's a tool to use to help make these things accessible. And, that's a really specialized knowledge that is really helpful for somebody to have, but is also complex enough that I don't think it's something that everybody needs to know. But I mean, you develop these special these sets of knowledge through this fellows program. And I think it's a great idea. And we actually modeled it after a writing fellows program that we already had on campus. And the other thing that we just did in January was a 10-day accessibility challenge. And we wanted to, Nazely and I were talking about this earlier about the whole, legalese kind of thing being kind of boring. And sometimes remediation can be boring. So like making it into like a game, almost like a challenge, instead of a, oh, you have to do this. And this is, we tried to make it a little fun. And we got some pretty good feedback on it. I think we're planning to offer similar challenges going forward. But it's especially in the era of the pandemic, and we did this back in January where things were still, vaccine hadn't quite, reached the, well, let's not get into the vaccine because there's a lot we could talk about with the vaccine. But anyway, still a lot going on with the pandemic in January. So I think it helped take the stress off a little bit, but it also helped people learn more about accessibility and become more confident in their abilities regarding creating accessible materials. So, and we are working on an article about that. So,
If I could jump in, Laura, I just want to say one thing, that, this is a lot for us. I think because of the pandemic, but also because it wasn't like ingrained in our education, in our professional development, and we need to make sure the next generations have this. So when you're hiring interns, if you're teaching classes, like I know Rebecca Mushter at Laura's campus incorporated DeQ University into her class. And so she's basically preparing the next generation to know this stuff already, and it won't. So this is a real culture change. And so make sure that, when you're working with students, that they know this stuff. You could also, to make it fun, I think one of the Michigan campuses did like a crowdsourcing project where they had students all over the campus remediating documents, for the betterment of campus inclusion. So there's some really neat things that you could do that other institutions have done to make sure that we're not always like, we want to end this remediation culture. We want to just move forward with access from the beginning. I know we don't have a lot of time before questions and answers, so we might need to go through the next slide or two real quick, or just skip it and Cable, how much do we have? A minute?
Yeah, you have about a minute to go until we dive into Q&A.
All right. We could also go on for 2 more minutes or something. I mean, this is really small, I think. Or not small, but like short to share. Is just being aware of areas for continued growth for yourself within your library, in the broader campus, and at the system level. I don't know if Laura, you wanted to mention anything else, but
I guess since probably many of you are probably interested in the individual level, and I think these can be shared within the library. Some things you could do are using or playing with some of the built-in accessibility features on your mobile devices. And actually, this is an idea I got from Rebecca Mushter, who's the art professor who Nazely was just talking about. She has her students do that for a week, and she has said that a lot of times they just keep it on because they found it so useful. And so just doing that with your mobile devices, PCs, and Macs that you have, and just self-educating through the resources that are out there. And there are a lot of resources out there.
And I'll just say that at the system level, you probably heard a lot about this week already, with the wonderful work of the SUNY Libraries accessibility cohort and all, the co-chairs and other key people that were part of this and continue to be part of this important work are on this call. So thank you for being here. And, we'll share more information as we learn about the continuation of DeQ University, which is a fantastic resource. But there's also other communities of practice that you can be, just learning from. There is an EIT accessibility listserv that you can message me about to join, which I'll throw my email in the chat real quick if you want to get on that. And then on Workplace, there's a library specific group, but there's also a web accessibility group that's a little bit bigger. And we talk about a lot of stuff, and we share different free courses or free conference opportunities or research, that's been conducted to just keep it all going. And yeah, these were the resources Laura mentioned before. Buff State shared Project Enable and Access Libraries with us, and the ALA and Big Ten Academic Alliance were huge influencers in the guidance development and also the processes within the accessibility cohort. Did I miss anything, Laura?
No, I think that's it.
Guys, I went ahead and added information on what the cohort will be doing coming up with regard to topics. And thank you for putting the workplace link in there.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah,
We
I'm
do
loving.
have a question in the chat here. Would either of you be able to talk about developing policies and procedures? So the first guideline in the lag says establish policies and procedures for making library materials accessible in a variety of formats, like requests for accommodation, alternative format, OCR scans, especially in regards to the process and if it's needed to be approved by the college administration. Are either of you able to speak to that a little bit?
I think where I would start is seeing what's out there. I can give you some general ideas where policies and procedures might be needed. For example, I think collection development is a big one. I think just in general, having a collection development policy that has items about disability, has items by disabled authors. I know that's just in general, when we're wanting to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, we want our collection to reflect the voices of a wide variety of people, and that includes disabled authors. So, and things about the experience of people with disabilities. So that's one thing to consider, but then there's also the more technical side of things and incorporating accessibility into the library procurement things. And I think one of the best ways to start with that element, there's a lot of resources out there, like the stuff that our cohort has done. And I think we have been reviewing VPATs from vendors because obviously across 64 campuses, there's a lot of overlap in the terms of the databases that we subscribe to. And so the VPAT, if you're not familiar with that term, is Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. And it is something that vendors create, basically describing how they meet web accessibility standards. And if they don't, and we can tell you, some VPATs are really good, some VPATs are not good. So what our cohort has done has reviewed a bunch of these VPATs and said, yeah, this is accurate. No, this is not accurate. And the Big Ten Academic Alliance also has some of those reviews. Most of the ones by our group were done in the last academic year, so they're pretty up to date. So like, that's something we incorporated into our plan at Oswego, was to, when we are looking at databases, to look at that repository and see what's there. And one of the other things we've talked about in the cohort is exceptions, because sometimes you have a really inaccessible tool, but it is the tool in that academic discipline. So I think there's a lot with collections in particular, but don't be too scared of those, because there's also a lot of resources and other libraries you can talk to about that. Yeah, I guess I think the first thing you need to do is like identify the different areas in the library where that's going to be relevant. And probably it's most libraries or most departments, if it's instruction, it might be, this is how you're creating accessible presentations or handouts. For special collections, it may be something like, we are going to create transcripts for everything that we have that's audio that we created, those sorts of things. I don't know if that helps or if that just makes things more overwhelming.
I think you pretty much summarized it. I don't know if it's necessary to have a library accessibility policy specifically. It's more about what you do to support your patrons, right? Like the campus might have a lot. It depends on the culture. If the culture of your campus is we're having campus-wide accessibility policy, and the rest of you are having procedures that tie in with this policy. There's that kind of model. And then I've also seen plans that have a digital content accessibility policy, a procurement accessibility policy, a library accessibility policy. So it really depends on, I guess, what the culture and governance structures are at your campus.
If I can add, I also put a link in the chat to what Purchase did with just a list of accessibility initiatives and updates. And that's a great place to start because you're probably already doing a lot on your campus. And it's good to keep kind of a list of those and make that public and start talking about it with people, because that way it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah, it's awesome. Thanks, Rebecca.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can dig up that link to SUNY Blue that I was telling you guys I would share.
I thought Shannon may have shared that. Did you share that, Shannon? I thought so. Maybe not. Yes, he did. I think we're good.
Thank you, Shannon.
Are there any final questions for our presenters? We're beyond our time, but we can probably fit in one question or two if they're quick.
I think Nazely's internet froze.
All right, well, thank you so much for presenting on this extremely important topic today. I thought it was a fantastic presentation. Thanks to everybody for attending, and we'll have a little bit of a break now before the 11 o'clock presentation starts. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Rebecca.
Where's Tavish? Come on.
Hold on. He's right here.
For those of you left, you have to see this cat. Hey, Tavish.
Yeah, this is my little kitty who likes to be on Zoom.
Yeah, what's the point of Zooming from home if we don't have the pets, right? Great job. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.